Before we start the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. And now, let's go. Story 1. I moved here to get away. Not from anything dramatic, just the noise, the deadlines, the constant press of bodies on the subway. I'd been saving for years, watching Zillow like it was a stock ticker, waiting for the right spot to open up somewhere far enough from town to finally feel quiet. The house was modest. 2 bedrooms, a weather-worn porch, surrounded by thick pine woods on all sides. The kind of place where the only traffic is deer trails and the loudest thing at night is the wind through the branches. It was perfect. At least it was at first. The first night, I barely slept. Not from fear or anything, just that weird new house feeling. Every board creak felt suspicious. Every thump in the walls had my attention. But it wasn't anything I could put my finger on. No animal sounds. No wind. Just stillness. Too much of it. The kind that presses on your eardrums. By the 3rd night, I started hearing it. At first, it was faint. Just my name, whispered from somewhere out in the trees. So quiet I thought it was in my head. Just Chris, that's my name. No one knew I'd moved. I hadn't even updated my address yet. I turned on the porch light. Nothing but fog and pine needles. The next night, the whisper came again. Closer. Same voice. Like someone standing just beyond the tree line. I grabbed a flashlight and scanned the woods. The beam cut through fog and brambles, casting long shadows. I thought I saw movement, something ducking behind a tree, but I wasn't sure. I called out, "Who's there?" No response, just silence, and then, again softer, "Chris." It wasn't until I replayed the voice in my head that something felt wrong. It didn't sound quite human. It was my name, yeah, but the tone, like someone trying to sound friendly and failing. Like something mimicking friendliness without ever understanding what it really meant. The following morning, I found footprints outside the window. Bare feet, long too long, and the toes were wrong, almost clawed, like they were pulled forward instead of splayed out. I told myself it was just some animal, probably a bear, maybe a cougar, something that wandered up close. But I didn't sleep that night. Around 3 a.m., I heard the porch boards creak, then scratching on the siding. Slow, deliberate, like claws being dragged across the wood. I didn't move, just lay there in bed, holding my breath, praying it would pass. It did, but only after I heard it again. "Chris, come outside." That's when I knew it wasn't in my head. I spent the next day locking everything down. Every window got a plank of wood nailed across it, not just for privacy, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there wanted me to see it, to acknowledge it, to let it in. I even boarded up the small bathroom window, the only one that faced the backwoods directly. It always felt colder near that window, like the glass itself was holding something back. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, the house looked like a bunker, and I felt like a prisoner. That night, I didn't go to bed. I made coffee, strong, black, burnt, and sat in the living room with a notebook in my lap and a hammer still in my hand. Not a gun, just a hammer. I told myself that if I saw it, really saw it, I'd know what to do. I just didn't know if I'd survive knowing. It came around 2:14 a.m. I heard the crunch of pine needles first. Then the boards groaned on the front porch. Then silence. That same thick silence that presses in around your ears until your own heartbeat sounds too loud. And then it spoke again, but not from the woods. From inside the walls. "Chris, you locked me out." I stood up so fast the chair fell backward. The hammer felt like it weighed 50 pounds in my hand. I pressed my back to the wall and just listened. No footsteps, no creaking, no sound of forced entry. Just a voice, low, stretched like a rubber band pulled too tight. "You looked at me. I know you saw me." That's when it scraped the walls again. Not outside. Inside. Something long and sharp dragging across drywall, slow and wet, like it wasn't just clawing. It was tasting the house. I turned toward the sound and whispered, "What do you want?" It didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, the hallway light, one of the only ones I hadn't turned off, flickered. Once. Twice. Then died. And something stepped into view at the end of the hall. It looked like me. Same shirt. Same jeans. Same tired eyes. But its smile was wrong. Too wide. Too still. Its teeth were too clean, like they'd never been used to eat. And its fingers were too long, like they'd forgotten how to stop growing. It tilted its head, and in my voice it said, "Let me back in, Chris. You brought me here." I ran, not outside, just to the nearest room with a door I could lock, the laundry room. I've been in here for almost an hour, scribbling all this into a notebook by flashlight. The thing hasn't moved. I can hear it breathing just outside the door. Slow, wet, eager, and I think it's getting in soon, because it's not saying my name anymore. It's saying something else now. Story 2. I started as a seasonal ranger at Black Hollow in late spring, when the air still held a chill and the trees hadn't fully leafed out. The park was typical: wide trails, lakefronts, the occasional drunk camper. Not glamorous, but I enjoy the outdoors, and there's not much paperwork. Funnily enough, the only thing that really stood out to me in that first week was the old signage. Nearly all of it featured the same character, Wally the Forest Ranger. Big cartoon glasses, green uniform, huge shoes, and a cheesy smile. He had slogans like, "Take care of the forest, and it will take care of you. Stay on the trail, it never fails. Leave nothing but footprints, take nothing but memories." You know the vibe. Wally's design screamed 1960s. Bright colors, bold outlines, hand-painted lettering. They were charming in that retro way, like gas station mascots from a bygone era. I mean, cute, I guess. But there was something about him that felt off. Maybe it was the eyes. They weren't drawn wrong, but they didn't quite line up either. Or maybe the smile was just too forced, like he was trying too hard to be liked. As the weeks passed, I started to see Wally everywhere. Old signs located along the trails. Cutouts in front of abandoned visitor centers. A giant fiberglass statue in the overgrown campground. I even found an old metal lunchbox in a storage shed. Wally was on it, holding a rake and trash bag. It's frustrating seeing the park run down like this. And it was certainly strange seeing this mascot everywhere. I wasn't the only one who wasn't a fan of Wally. My supervisor, Tanya, told me. Kids hate him. Locals too. So why is he still everywhere? I asked. She shrugged. Budget cuts, man. You'd be amazed what gets left behind. I asked her where he came from. She didn't know. Some old regional campaign, possibly. She always changed the subject. It was odd, but I didn't think much of it. I was just happy to be out in the peace and quiet. But unfortunately for me, my relationship with Wally was only just beginning. It started small. I walked the trail near Eagles Ridge and paused at a Wally sign I knew well. Same idiotic smile, same clean up your mess line, but something seemed off. Perhaps the angle had shifted just slightly. Or maybe it was that his raised finger, always pointing to the sky, now bent a degree to the left, toward the trees. It was subtle enough that I questioned myself. Memory playing tricks kind of thing. Then another sign up near the old picnic area had both eyes scratched out, like someone had gouged them with a blade. I thought it might have been teenagers, but the only campers in the area that week were a pair of elderly birders from Wisconsin. Still, vandalism happens. I'll let it go. Same thing with the mural on the side of the tool shed. Wally had always been wearing his vintage uniform. But that morning, I swear, he was wearing the same thing as me. I asked Tanya if someone had repainted it. A practical joke to welcome me to the job. Some lame hazing or something. She gave me a weird look. That mural's been sun-faded since the 80s. Nobody's touched it. I was confused. A little creeped out, but I moved on. Days later, I was picking up old trash from a forgotten trail when I spotted a building I'd never seen on the maps. It was half hidden in brush, roof sagging under decades of snow. Moss blanketed the shingles. The front door had no handle. I pried it open with my multi-tool and stepped inside. It was an old visitor center. Place was filled with park information, taxidermied animals, flyers about summer programs, that sort of thing. In the middle of the room sat an old projector. It was on one of those wheeled carts every high school used to have. In front of it was a fraying screen covered in mildew. I don't know what compelled me to play it. It shouldn't even have worked. But after a loud pop and hum, the film crackled to life. It was grainy with saturated colors. Wally stood next to a Boy Scout. A jingle played. Wally the Forest Friend says keep the forest clean, pack your trash, douse your fire, and leave the forest green. Wally's mouth moved a little off sync. The kid was holding a marshmallow stick. It was all very innocent. Retro. Pretty lame, but kind of fun. Like I said, the guy was kitschy as hell. But then the film jumped. 1 second, Wally was talking to the boy. Next second, the screen was static, and then Wally was alone. Still smiling. Still waving. But the forest behind him had darkened. The colors desaturated. The sky went from baby blue to gray. The boy was gone. Then back. Wally was just staring at him. The boy looked scared. Wally started speaking, but it was hard to make out, and it was a good octave lower than his speaking voice. I leaned closer, trying to hear what he was saying to the boy. Then the cartoon glitched again, and Wally was closer. Looking out. Looking at me? It glitched back, and the happy-go-lucky Wally was teaching a PSA again. I got a weird feeling that didn't go away. When I left the visitor center, something about the air had changed. It wasn't just that the sky was dimming early or the sudden hush in the trees. It was as if I'd stepped over some invisible boundary when I watched that film, and now the forest wasn't interested in letting me go the same way I came. And for the first time in all my days of being out in the woods, I was lost. I moved deeper into the forest. The terrain sloped downward, thick with rotting pine needles and ferns so high they brushed my chest. My boots squelched in soft earth, and even the insects had gone quiet. Every now and then, I'd hear a faint snapping sound, like a twig breaking far off, and I'd freeze. But nothing ever followed. Then I saw smoke. It was faint, like the ghost of a campfire long dead. I followed it. After 10 minutes, the trees broke into a clearing. A shallow ring of scorched earth lay at the center, ringed by chunks of broken stone that might have once been benches or maybe some kind of fire pit circle. The ground was blackened, cracked, ash-flecked. Whatever fire had burned here had done more than roast marshmallows. Sitting just beyond the ring, half collapsed under vines, was a wooden structure, an old scout shelter or amphitheater maybe. The roof had caved in one corner, and graffiti scrawled in charcoal across the front read, "He walks after fire." I stood there for a long time. Then I stepped toward the stone circle. Something crunched underfoot. I looked down. Burnt plastic. Melted, but still recognizable. A pair of shattered eyeglasses. Thick, round lenses. I knelt, stomach flipping. They looked just like Wally's. But the glass was bubbled and warped, the metal blackened and twisted like it had been thrown into a bonfire. I picked them up and turned them over. The arms were gone. Nothing else nearby. Just the glasses. But I did see something in the dirt. A footprint. Not a boot. Not a sneaker. Barefoot. Toes warped. Blackened. Burned. Like someone had walked straight through a blaze and left the skin behind. Suddenly, I felt like I wasn't alone. I looked around. The empty forest stared back at me, but the feeling still nagged me. Was someone behind me? I grabbed my phone and flipped the camera into selfie mode. As soon as I looked at the screen, my stomach dropped. Behind me, way off in the distance, was a figure. Suspenders. Round glasses. A silhouette, but not quite. The limbs were too long. The head too still. He didn't move. I didn't either. I blinked, and he was gone. I quickly made my way out of there, and by some grace of God, found my way to a trail. That night, I thought I heard something crunching in the woods. I stepped out with my flashlight. Just trees. Just wind. The next morning, someone had rearranged the pine cones in front of my hut. They spelled hi. I started finding Wally signs again. But it was different now. New cutouts I swore I hadn't seen before. A sign pinned to the door of the outhouse, showing Wally pointing directly at the viewer, with red ink scribbled under his feet. "You forgot something." I removed it, tossed it, but the next day it was back. I told Tanya. She half listened while eating a sandwich. Someone probably squatting out here. Old guy maybe. Creep. Happens more than you'd think. I spent the next day combing the woods near the old cabin. I kept finding more Wally merch, stickers stuck to trees, Wally-themed coloring books in perfect condition, Wally's face on paper plates tied to branches with fishing line. None of it made sense. I couldn't shake the feeling. Something about this place didn't sit right. I borrowed Tanya's car and drove an hour to a small-town public library. In the archive room, buried among faded brochures and yellowing newspapers, I found him. Bernard Wally Walcott, 1963 to 1972. A friendly-looking man in every photo. Round glasses, suspenders, and easy smile. He'd started the Forest Friend Initiative. Wally, the cartoon mascot, was based on him. Then the article took a turn. In July of 1969, something went wrong. Some suspected bullying. Others blamed the isolation out in the woods. Either way, something broke in Wally. While leading a group of young scouts, he tied them up and set the whole campsite on fire. Maybe they ignored one too many of his safety messages. Only 2 boys made it out. The park never recovered. Visitation plummeted. I was freaked out, but the idea of me actually seeing this guy, his ghost, or whatever, surely the problem was my mental well-being. I told myself it was stress, the mind playing tricks. Occam's razor, anyone? I started doing yoga, breathing exercises, took sleeping aids to get plenty of rest. Anything to reduce stress and anxiety. And it worked. I calmed down. I stopped seeing the figure. Weeks later, a group of campers arrived. 4 guys from Chicago doing a reunion trip. Nice enough. They hiked all day, drank all night. I warned them about staying away from any abandoned structures. They didn't listen. Few nights in, they complained the old shower block was cursed. So they kept hearing noises at night, like metal screeching, doors slamming, kids screaming. One guy said he saw a figure watching them through the steam while he pissed behind the showers. So it looked like a man, but not really. Said it smelled like wet matches. I didn't tell him what I'd seen or experienced. Instead, I hiked out there myself the next morning to check it out. The shower block was a rotting concrete cube, windowless, half collapsed in places. Graffiti caked every surface, all pretty harmless. Ghost sticks pentagrams. You know the deal. But something new had been added recently. A mural, painted in a childlike scrawl across one entire wall. It was Wally, but not the cartoon version. Not the smiling mascot. This Wally had empty black pits for eyes. His grin split his face like an axe wound. His hat was half burned, melting into his skull. His arm, once used to cheerfully wag a finger, now ended in a charred, skeletal stump, as if he'd been reaching for someone in a fire. And beneath him, in the same childish script, "He burns what you leave behind." I couldn't downward dog my way out of this one. I was scared, and that night, just past 2 a.m., something screamed from the woods behind my ranger hut. Not human, not animal. The place also smelt. Like smoke. Like wet matches. I looked out my window. Far down the slope, through the trees, a figure stood. Tall, thin, wrong, wearing the shreds of a ranger uniform. Smoke pouring out of its back. Head tilted to one side, like it didn't know how a neck worked. And even at that distance, I could see 2 glowing blank holes where its cartoon eyes used to be. It pointed a skeletal, blistered finger at me. I didn't sleep. I waited. This time I knew it was not stress. I knew it was not loneliness. He was there. It was time for me to get out. At sunrise, I walked around the cabin. No footprints. No marks. But the pine cones were back. This time they spelled out the words "bad boy." I burned them in the fire pit. I messaged Tanya I was leaving. She offered me a ride. We agreed for her to pick me up on the main road a few clicks east. I went on my way down the necessary trail. The wind picked up. It blew in one direction only, toward that creepy fire ring. It hissed as it moved, dry and haze-like, carrying the scent of burning cedar. And then I heard the jingle. Soft, warped, that same clunky, old-timey tune from the film reel. Only, it wasn't coming from a speaker. It was being whistled, off-key, slow, from somewhere among the trees. It took me a second to recognize. It was Wally's theme. I turned around, eyes scanning each shadow. Nothing stirred, but the whistling continued. Closer now. I tripped over a log, and then the whistling stopped. Just silence. Then a child's voice called out. It was all so surreal. I thought I was dreaming, until it returned. Faint, distant, but surely real. Hello, hello, mister. I looked around. The woods were empty. At least, they seemed to be. Hey, mister, want to make a fire? Again, the voice was closer. I froze, tried to will myself invisible. Nothing moved. Then came the sound of sticks snapping under someone's foot. Please? We can show you how. Wally says we're really good at it now. The voice was childlike, but strange. Like an old record someone had played too many times. Worn down, edges warped. I kept scanning the area, try to locate the source. The trees seemed to be shifting, or maybe just my brain was. But the next second, I saw it. A fire, burning perfectly in a clearing about 20 yards away. And seated around it, 6 children, all in old-fashioned scout uniforms. Their faces blackened, their bodies completely still. And at the center of it all stood Wally. His ranger outfit charred and covered in ash. His flesh looked wrong, like someone had put on a costume made of human skin, but hadn't zipped it up properly. Jaw hanging way too open. He was holding a stick with a flaming marshmallow, and he smiled when he saw me. "Don't be shy," he said, voice warped with static. "There's room for one more." I backed away. The children all turned in unison, heads slowly twisting like gears in a clock. Their eyes reflected nothing. "Don't you want to learn?" Wally asked. "Don't you want to do it right?" One of the kids raised their hand. "Show him," she said. And then, like choreographed dance, the 6 children began to mimic building a fire. In eerie harmony, they chanted instructions: clear the ground, stack the kindling, circle the ring with stones. Their hands moved precisely, in a dance they'd done 100 times. "Light it, feed it, watch it grow." They smiled. "Too wide. Never forget the water," said one. "We forgot." "I said I was sorry," whispered another. "I said I was sorry," they all shouted together. The fire surged higher. Wally tilted his head, like he was admiring his little campers. Then he looked at me. "You can't leave," he said. "Not until you learn. Light it, feed it, watch it grow." I turned and ran. Branches whipped at my face. Roots clawed my boots. I didn't care. Behind me, the voices kept calling. "Light it, feed it, watch it grow. Light it, feed it." I ran until I couldn't hear them anymore. Until I collapsed. Wheezing, heart drumming. I made it to the road. The woods were silent again, but the air still smelled like smoke. I never went back. Black Hollow is closed now. Last week, a control burn swept through the area I'd been in. At least that's what the article said. I wonder if anything survived. If that's the end of it. But I still dream of Wally. And at night, sometimes when I'm just falling asleep, I can still hear it. Light it, feed it, watch it grow. Story 3. It all started a week ago. I was cycling on my bike. It was an old piece of junk that I got for cheap off of eBay. It wasn't exactly a glamorous ride, but it sure as hell beat walking. The specific area that I live in is on the border of the countryside and the suburbs. The area is not exactly the safest place to be in, especially at night, and so I had my eyes scanning all over the place looking for any unusual shapes. That's when I arrived at a 4-way intersection a few streets away from my house. I slowed my bicycle down to check if there were any cars coming down the corner. I think that's where I saw it for the first time. Out in the middle of the intersection was what seemed to be a piece of roadkill. It was about the size of a goat, but at first, it didn't look like any specific kind of animal that I knew of, though maybe I could have chalked it up to the environment being low light. When I saw that, I decided to it all happened 3 weeks ago. I was going home from work after my shift had ended. It was an hour to midnight, and the sky was an unassuming tone of navy blue that contrasted pleasantly with the bright orange streetlights. Take a moment longer to get a better look. It looked like it had been there for weeks, although I was certain that it had not been there when I passed here this morning. Its bones were almost picked clean were it not for the stray patches of skin and fur that loosely clung to its frame. Its skull looked like the skull of a predator, not particularly canine or feline, but the best way I could describe it would be if a horse had a dog's teeth. For a short few seconds, I stared into its empty eye sockets and felt a cold, sharp feeling in my gut. After those seconds of observation, I decided it was enough and started pedaling past it to get home before midnight. When I did finally get home, I did all the usual rituals. Stuff like undressing, taking a shower, putting on some YouTube in the background, and making myself something to eat. I got myself a skillet, some butter and eggs as I got ready to make scrambled eggs. I turned the stove on and slowly covered the pan in the molten butter. That's when I noticed something unusual. I cracked the first egg and was immediately greeted with an unpleasant smell, alongside the realization that the egg was rotten. At first, I thought it was just one bad egg, but after cleaning my skillet and trying it again, I was devastated to discover that all my eggs were rotten. I didn't know how that was possible, but all 20 of them had gone bad. Aside from the devastating financial loss, I was also quite hungry, so I decided to reach for the only other thing in my kitchen that could be considered an effort-free meal, a box of cereal. As I filled my bowl and went to get my milk jug, I was horrified to discover that it had spoiled. I was getting quite confused at that point. Had my fridge given out at the time I was out of the house? It couldn't be, because if that had happened, the ice would have melted. Either way, that was a concern for future me. Current me gave a very limited amount of fucks and just wanted to have a bite and turn his brain off until he decided it was a good enough time to doze off to sleep. As such, I ended up having dry cereal and water for dinner. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had gotten no sleep at all. My neck hurt, and I had a mild headache. What little will I had was used to push my body off the bed and into my feet. The floor felt cold, too cold for my liking, but I merely pushed through the unpleasant feeling. I shambled my way to the bathroom so that I could take a warm shower and freshen up. The warm water washed over my shoulders and slowly shook me from my sleepy days. I got out of the shower and got dressed for the day before making my way towards the kitchen to scout for something that could be considered nourishing. However, as I gazed into my pantry, I was only met with a sleeve of graham crackers and some assorted foods that I was simply not patient enough to cook. So after putting the crackers in my bag and having a glass of water to clear my mind, I got out, troughed the back door, and locked it securely. Then I set off to work on my bike. On the way to work, I noticed someone had already cleared that piece of roadkill from the middle of that intersection near my home. I couldn't imagine who would have the courage to even touch that thing. Just imagining having to drag it elsewhere made me gag a little. As I got to the office, I noticed that the building's air conditioner was turned off. When I asked the boss, he told me that it was smelling weird and that he was going to have a maintenance guy have a look at it after lunch. He told me that there was a fan in the back room that I could use in the meantime. I wasn't thrilled to hear that, but since the day was not that hot, I decided to just go fetch the fan. As I got settled in my office and started to work, I noticed the room started to smell a bit moldy. At first, I tried to ignore it and work through it, but soon my throat started to itch and breathing became a little bit more taxing. That's when I realized I was having an asthma attack. I haven't had one of these in years, but I suppose sitting here like a moron and breathing in mold spores did the trick. I decided to go talk to my boss about the mold problem and also the fact that I was currently having respiratory issues. My boss is by no means an unreasonable guy, and when he saw that I was having trouble, he sent me home earlier. He also handed me an inhaler. He told me that his son has chronic asthma and that he keeps an inhaler in his bag in case of an emergency. I cannot thank him enough for that. However, I did not want to spend even a second longer in that building. And as such, I made my way out of there with speeds comparable to an Olympic athlete. As I was retrieving my bicycle, I decided that before heading home, I would go get groceries because I was short on pretty much everything. On the way there, I was making mental notes on what exactly I was missing: eggs, milk, vegetables, and such things. Maybe I would even get myself a little treat to keep me on my feet. As I got to the market, I chained my bike on a nearby pole and made my way inside, mindlessly grabbing a shopping basket on my way to the shopping aisles. The air in the supermarket felt moist and damp like a cardboard box. In fact, old cardboard was one of the most prevalent scents there, with notes of dirt that were just faint enough to not comment on, but not enough so that your mind can ignore it. I was idly browsing the canned goods aisle when I remembered that I in fact did not have all day to spend looking at jars of pickled mushrooms. My basket had almost everything I was in need of except for some vegetables. As such, I decided to go to the produce section in hopes of rectifying that. While there, I was picking up a few carrots for a stew when noticed something strange. All of the carrots were becoming soft. Then they started to become mushy. As soon as I saw that, I was quite unsettled. But that was only the beginning of my horror, because as soon as I looked away, I noticed that the apples were visibly going putrid, even though not a second ago they were beautifully ripe. As I look back at my hands, I am shocked to discover that the carrot I was holding was now merely a gooey, dark orange puree. As I dropped it and stumbled back, I felt my elbow touch something round and soft, kind of like a water balloon, but just a little more firm. As I turned to acknowledge it, though, something else caught my attention. As I looked at them, all the greens had turned a sickly dark yellow all within seconds in a motion similar to a wave, as if they were being affected by an invisible aura. I did not have time to observe it, though, as I realized that that soft, unseen object was in fact a very putrid watermelon, which burst as my elbow put pressure on it /s soft exterior, immediately splattering me with it /s juices, which stained my shirt and soaked the side of my pants with a fluid of which the word vial would be unworthy of describing just how unpleasant it was. Its density was thin and watery, but the scent was absolutely awful. It was like if you spilled yogurt inside of a hot car and let it ferment in there for the whole afternoon. But that was only the liquid that was currently staining my clothes, because the smell of the room around me felt way worse. The aroma of old cardboard had been replaced by a hodgepodge of rotting smells from multiple kinds of fruit, which combined to make a sickly, thick aroma. As soon as the realization of my current situation hit me, I just dropped my shopping basket and bolted out of there, which was a stupid fucking decision because the floor was currently covered in very slippery watermelon goop, which caused me to slip and fall on my ass. That was now also soaked in that thin fluid. After that absolute fiasco, I decided to miserably speed walk towards the exit instead, while doing my best to not to whimper like a kicked puppy. Then I got up on my bike and cycled off towards my home, completely unable to process what just happened. After what took place inside that convenience store, I was scared shitless. My mind was going a million miles a second, trying to find a logical explanation as to why everything inside that market turned to mush in the blink of an eye, but no reasonable explanation came to my mind. After what felt like an eternity stuck in thought, I finally got snapped out of it by a loud car horn. I'd almost gotten run over by a guy in a yellow pickup truck. He yelled something about seeing where I was going and called me a slur before driving off with a scowl on his face. I was already exhausted by that point because of all that took place today, and I was feeling both sticky and miserable, so I didn't even pay him any mind. All that I could think about was a warm shower and comfy bed. As I reached my home, I put away my bike in the backyard and entered through the back door. As soon as I did, I realized that something was not right. I didn't use my keys on it, and yet it was open. Had I forgotten to lock the door? No, I have vivid memories of me locking it just a few hours ago. That's when I realized someone could have broken into my home. After that realization, I quickly drew out my pocket knife and held it tightly in my right hand while my left hand looked for the light switch. After a second or two of frantic searching, I finally managed to turn the light on, which revealed something that I found most displeasing. My usually clean white kitchen floor tiles were stained with long tracks of mud, and many of my dishes and silverware were broken and strewn about. It was as if a hurricane had come through here. The adrenaline was rushing over me, and, ignoring all common sense, I decided to investigate deeper to see if any intruders were still inside the house. As I took a few more steps into the house, I felt a concerning aroma. It was like the forest on a rainy day. If it were in different circumstances, I would possibly even find the smell to be pleasant, but not here, and especially not now. First, I looked into the living room. It was absolutely trash. My couch, which I worked very hard for, was covered in dirt and decomposing leaves. The carpet, which just this morning was a nice and pleasant off-white, was now stained and filthy like a white poodle that just played in the mud. Next, I made my way to my bedroom. As I braced upon its closed door, I was not prepared for the absolute foul odor that was about to assault my nostrils. I pushed the door open, and immediately the smell hit me like a concussive blast. It was horrible. The air tasted sweet and made my eyes water. It was a powerful and overwhelming scent, but it wasn't as simple as that. It was as if someone had taken a Thanksgiving turkey and left it in the dinner table untouched until February. I immediately gagged involuntarily before dumping this morning's cereal all over my already ruined shoes. I then looked around for the source of the smell, only to quickly find that there were several animal carcasses laid out in a pile directly on top of my bed. Needless to say, I was practically frozen. All my hair stood on end, and my muscles tensed like they never did before in my life. All I could do was stand there and look at the scene before me. Multiple kinds of rotten animal carcasses, all arranged in a formation that sorts them by size. In the center, there was the body of what seemed to be the same odd carcass which I had seen on the street yesterday, while at its sides were several smaller animals: raccoons, dogs, possums, and a handful more that I simply cannot recall. It was truly terrifying to see, and my most immediate thought was that I was going to get added to that pile very soon if I did not act quickly. I immediately turned around to the other side of the room and opened a small wardrobe, where I quickly pushed aside some clothes to reveal a small safe. I hastily inputted the code and opened the safe, which housed a small handgun and a loaded magazine, which I rapidly inserted into the weapon and chambered around, after which I then immediately turned around again, only to discover that, to my horror, in the span of no more than 30 seconds, all those bodies were simply gone, as if they had vanished or slipped away in perfect silence, leaving only a deep red stain where they were once placed. As I stood there and considered turning the gun on myself to avoid having to deal with whatever the hell that was, I was interrupted by the sound of even more dishes breaking in the kitchen. As I rushed out of my bedroom in hopes of catching whatever the hell that was on it /S way out, I saw something which I think no man should ever have to witness. They were standing on the door to the backyard. All the bodies that were once motionless on top of my bed were all moving in unison, joined at odd angles by what seemed to be vines and branches, all arranged in a vaguely humanoid shape that towered over me. The body of the strange animal was acting as a kind of torso, while the carcasses of the smaller animals acted as limbs. It moved in an exaggerated and clumsy manner, like a rag doll being puppet by string. As soon as I caught sight of it, a primal fear overtook me as I raised my handgun and pointed it at the abomination /S center, my finger on the trigger as we both stood still for what felt like ages, until the creature finally broke the stalemate by taking a step towards me. It /S feet, if you could even call them, that made a wet, squelching noise as it made contact with the ground. That was all the incentive I needed to start making holes into that thing, like it was a boat, and I was a duct tape salesman. I quickly fired off all 15 shots of 9mm right into it. My ears were ringing, and the muzzle flash was burned into my retinas as I felt the slide on my handgun hold open. The only thing worse than the tension of the moment where I waited for my vision to readjust to the lighting in the room was the abject terror of realizing that all the bullets just went straight through the rotting abomination without doing even as little as making it flinch. As I stood there in awe, and paralyzed by fear, the abomination made another clumsy step, it /S body leaking mixed fluids through the fresh bullet holes and leaving a trail behind it. I felt the corners of my vision start to darken as it closed the distance between us. I could hear it take deep and gurgled breaths, even though I'm pretty sure it did not need to breathe. My legs felt weak, and my heart thumped so hard that I was sure it would pop like a balloon any second now. As it stood not even a meter away from me, it raised one of its /S appendages. It was comprised of 3 different animals: a possum, a raccoon, and what seemed to be a house cat, all in various states of decay. As it did so, my legs gave out and I dropped to my knees. I felt as if it was taking the very energy from within my bones, as the ringing in my ears became overpoweringly loud and my vision faded out like an incandescent light turning off. I awakened in a hospital bed 2 days later. As I would later come to discover, apparently the neighbors had called the cops after they heard the gunshots. The police had found me unconscious on the floor, surrounded by bullet casings and chunks of flesh and ripped fur. Needless to say, they had several questions for me that I simply could now answer. I am currently still in the hospital. The doctor says if all goes well, they'll be discharged tomorrow morning. The doctor explained to me that, as it turns out, I had suffered from methane poisoning. However, he assured me that the damage would not be permanent. As of now, I'm fearing for my life, and I would really appreciate any advice for my current situation, especially given it /S extra melt unusual circumstances. Story 4. I got scared of the library as a kid. I never told anyone what I saw, or thought I saw. Even now, remembering it sends a shiver through me. I sat in one of the quiet study stalls and focused on my notes. My pencil rolled off the table and landed near the bookshelf. As I leaned down to pick it up, I froze. Just under the bookshelf, a green, scaly tail slipped out of sight the moment my fingers touched the pencil. My breath caught in my throat. The tail had moved quickly, deliberately. It has a strong sense of danger and reflex like that of a startled cat. I sat back up slowly, heart thudding, but forced myself to focus on the open book in front of me. It was probably just a lizard, I told myself. Some kid's oversized pet that got loose. It made sense, sort of. I didn't want to think about it too much. I never did. Quiet and withdrawn, I was used to keeping things to myself, burying strange moments under layers of silence. So I kept reading, kept pretending, never mentioning the green tail to anyone. Not then, not ever. I turned the page, moving on to the next subject. The library had settled back into its usual calm vibe. A few seats near me, I noticed one of my classmates, Dina, shy girl with messy hair and long blouse too long for her size, the girl who rarely spoke. She sat hunched over her notebook, sketching with quiet intensity. I glanced over just briefly and caught sight of her drawing, a woman's face, soft and calm, with kind, almost glowing eyes. There was something about the expression, gentle but watchful, that made me pause. But Dina didn't look up. She just kept drawing, like she didn't even realize I was watching. After a while, I packed my things and headed home, the image of the green tail still in my mind. That night, after dinner, curiosity got the better of me. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and searched for large green lizard species. Pictures of iguanas, monitor lizards, and other reptiles filled the screen. Some big, some even massive, but none of them matched what I saw. Their scales were smoother, more uniform, almost too soft in comparison. The tail I saw in the library was different, rougher, thicker, covered in wide, jagged scales like small pieces of armor. I closed the laptop slowly, a strange unease settling over me. Whatever it wasn't just a lizard. The next day at school, our teacher asked the class to present the drawings we had worked on for homework. One by one, we stood in front of the room, holding up their sketches, landscapes, superheroes, animals. When it was Dina's turn, she walked slowly to the front, clutching her notebook to her chest. Her messy hair fell in her face, but she didn't push it back. She turned the page and held it up. It was the same drawing. The woman with the kind, watchful eyes. "This is my mom," Dina said softly, almost too quiet for the class to hear. "She passed away when I was little, but I remember her face. I draw her a lot." She paused, then added, "She always made me feel safe. Like no matter what was happening, she was watching." I turned to look at our classmates, and they seemed to whisper to one another insensitively. But some are praising her drawing skills. I shifted in my seat. There was something in Dina's voice, something about the way she said watching, that made my chest tighten. I glanced at the drawing again. Those eyes. I couldn't explain it, but they felt sad and worried. During lunch break, I found Dina sitting alone under a tree, picking at her sandwich without really eating. I hesitated, then walked over, the memory of her drawing still lingering in my mind. "Hey, that woman you drew," I said quietly. "Your mom. She looked nice. I mean, sort of. Sorry about your loss, I hope." Dina didn't answer. She looked up at me, her eyes calm but unreadable, like a pane of glass hiding something deeper. Then, without a word, she stood, brushed off her skirt, and walked away across the grass, leaving me there in the silence. I watched her go, a strange chill creeping in. There was something about the way she moved, too deliberate, too distant. Then it clicked. Dina. She was the girl from last year, the one who had collapsed in the hallway during winter term, eyes rolled back, muttering things no one could understand. The teachers had called it a seizure, but everyone whispered it was something else. Possessed, some kids had said. I hadn't believed it then, but now, I wasn't so sure. She hadn't been the same since. During study time, I made my way back to the library, the weight of Dina's presence still pressing on my mind. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself I was overthinking everything. Books, facts, routine, that was what I needed. But Dina was sitting on her usual spot, still quiet, and eyes focused on her drawing. Halfway through reviewing my notes, I felt an uneasy pressure in my chest. I grabbed my water bottle and took sips and wiped my sweaty forehead. I told myself it was nothing. I got up and headed toward the bathroom near the back of the library to clear my head. As I pushed open the door, I stopped dead. There it was. Massive, green, crouched near the far wall like it had just landed, scales rough and jagged like broken stone. Its eyes were enormous, glossy, and intelligent. A single upward curved fang jutted from its mouth, glinting like bone. It looked like something torn straight from the pages of a mythology book, ancient, impossible wrong. It turned and looked right at me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. Time cracked around me. Then, in a flash of motion too fast to track, it slithered up the wall, through the narrow bathroom window, and vanished into the outside ground. I still heard the dry leaves it stepped on. I stood frozen, heart hammering, the silence screaming in my ears. I wasn't imagining it this time. It was real. In the days that followed, I tried to move on. I told myself the creature must have been some rare, undocumented animal, maybe something exotic that escaped from a collector. I even searched again, deeper into obscure reptile forums and cryptid websites, but nothing matched the creature's jagged scales, those ancient eyes, or the fang that looked more like a weapon than a tooth. I stopped searching after that. Some things weren't meant to be found on the internet. Then, one morning, gossips floated through the classroom. Dina was transferring to another school. No one knew why. She didn't say goodbye to many people. On her last day, she quietly packed up her things, slipping her books and notebooks in her bag as if it were any other afternoon. But when the final bell rang and she left, I noticed something under her desk, her sketch pad. I picked it up, unsure whether to return it or keep it safe until I saw her again. Curiosity pulled me in. Flipping through the pages, past drawings of her mother, nature scenes, and soft, eerie portraits, I stopped cold. There it was, the lizard, drawn in sharp pencil lines, its scales rough and jagged, its body coiled like it was ready to spring. Those same massive eyes stared from the page, intelligent and unblinking. The upward fang gleamed with a white smudge of pencil. It was exact, too exact. She had seen it too. As I turned the pages, more and more absurd creatures were shown. I can't tell if they looked ridiculous or scary. It could be both. One page even showed her mom looking disturbingly so happy, her smile so wide, her eyes squinting, and her eyebrows turning upward, creating creases on her forehead. My hands trembled slightly as I closed the sketch pad. Dina hadn't just drawn her memories. She had drawn what was watching us. Or maybe she had drawn what she wanted to exist. Story 5. It was already dark outside. For 2 hours, the only sound was the relentless ticking of the big clock on the wall. They'd trapped me again. Honestly, it almost felt like my own fault. Same trick as always. Wait until I went to the bathroom, toss my stuff into an empty classroom after our last period, and lock the door as soon as I stepped in to grab it. It was the perfect way to farm laughs, and Seth and his friends were good at it. The whole class walked by laughing as loud as they could. Usually a teacher would notice pretty fast and come let me out, giving the kids a mild scolding. This time, no one came. So I waited, tried shouting for someone, gave up, and sat there, trying not to cry. I didn't want to give them that satisfaction. Crouched in the corner, I kept wondering when the night janitor would finally spot me. That's when I saw it, a shape moving in the dark, low to the ground beneath the chairs. At first it was just a blur. Then it grew clearer. Long limbs and thin frame. Blue skin and huge black eyes. I didn't panic or flinch because I knew that silhouette. "Harry," I asked. He walked funny, like he always did, like his knees were put together wrong. Wobbly, tilted, arms swinging a bit too far like he was trying to act human but couldn't quite pull it off. He crouched beside me, watching me the same way he did when I was 8 and scraped my leg on the pavement. Back then, Mom called him my imaginary friend. "He's just in your head," she'd say, smiling like it was sweet. But she never looked too closely at the drawings I made of him. He wasn't really a friend. And to me, though, he always felt real. He even cast a shadow. Terry leaned in, his mouth just inches from my ear. Then, in a low, raspy voice, broken by erratic laughter, he whispered, "Asterisk, let me kill them. Asterisk backslash asterisk backslash asterisk backslash asterisk." Good thing Ms. Mayworth hadn't left the school yet. She passed by and unlocked the door a few minutes later and got really angry when she saw me sitting there alone in the dark. She asked me who did it, but I didn't give her any names. Just looked down and followed her out in silence. I walked back to my house hoping no one would see me. But of course they were there. Seth and his pack, waiting near my street like wolves that couldn't let the kill go. Soon as they saw me, they lost it, bursting out laughing, stumbling over each other like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Jesus, look at his face, one of them shouted. I bet he cried so much. I didn't say a word, just kept walking past them and into my house. Mom was too lost in whatever pill she was on to notice me, so I went straight to bed. But it took me a while to fall asleep. I kept thinking about Terry's face. His words, backslash asterisk, backslash asterisk, backslash asterisk. The next morning, I tried to keep my distance from Seth and the others. Skipped lunch altogether. Instead, I found a quiet spot out in the gardens at school, under one of the big trees, and started reading. I didn't think anyone would bother me, but then I saw Ms. Mayworth. She walked straight over, holding an apple. You shouldn't skip meals, she said, crouching a little so we were eye level. I just nodded, took the apple, and mumbled a quiet thanks. You okay? She asked. I'm fine, Elite. She kept at it, gently trying to get me to talk about what happened. But I didn't. Then she glanced at the book on my lap. The Flowers of Evil by Baudelaire. Pretty advanced for your age, she said. I looked away. I like poetry, I admitted, almost embarrassed to say it out loud. With a smile, she told, Same here. See you in class, and headed off toward the school. Not long after, I heard Terry's voice coming out of the branches above me. I looked up, and there he was, arms looped over like a monkey, his long blue fingers gripping the wood. He was laughing, loud, erratic. Then the whisper came back, now sharper, over and over. Asterisk, let me kill them. Let me kill them. Let me kill them. Asterisk, it crawled under my skin, made my hands shake. I couldn't take it, so I got up and left. As I walked off, I heard him shout behind me, his voice almost desperate. Asterisk, you have to let me kill them, asterisk, backslash, asterisk, backslash, asterisk, backslash, asterisk. It was late afternoon. Last period. Ms. Mayworth's English class. I asked to go to the bathroom. She nodded, barely looking up from the book she was lecturing us from. But when I got back, everything fell off. The class was still going. She was reading aloud, but there were muffled laughs across the room, smiles being bitten down, and heads turning slightly toward me, then away. I stopped near the door for a second before walking quietly back to my seat. Something felt wrong, so I checked my desk, then my backpack. That's when I noticed my notebook was gone, the one I kept very well hidden. My hand started shaking as I rifled through every pocket, every book, but it was gone. Then a kid next to me leaned in with a smirk and slid a paper toward my hand. I looked down. It was one of my poems, ripped straight from my notebook. I looked around. Slowly, horribly, I saw more. Plenty of pages passed around like trading cards. Some read them aloud in hushed, mocking voices, while Ms. Mayworth called for attention, trying to understand what was going on. A few tried to stifle laughter, and some didn't even try. I looked across the room and saw him. Seth. He was sitting there like a king, holding my notebook, now half empty like it was a trophy, looking right at me with that smug, dead-eyed smile. Something broke in me at that moment, and I stood up so fast I knocked my chair over. Ms. Mayworth paused her reading. I didn't even hear what I shouted because my vision blurred red. My throat was raw. It felt like something else had taken control of my mouth, something deeper than rage. The class burst into more laughter. Not at the poems anymore. At me. Seth leaned back in his chair, relaxed, enjoying the sight of my tears. Ms. Mayworth quickly walked over, placing a hand on my shoulder. Outside, she said gently but firmly, "Let's go." And I followed, eyes down, face burning. She closed the door behind us. We stood in the hallway as I kept staring at the floor, ashamed. "Are you okay?" she asked. I didn't respond, and we kept silent for a few seconds. Then I heard it. Terry's voice. Asterisk, can I kill them now? Asterisk. His voice was right there, facing me. I looked up and froze. Ms. Mayworth stood there, but her eyes became huge, black, endless. Her fingers had stretched, long and blue, and she smiled like Terry. She asked me again, softly, "Asterisk, can I asterisk?" My throat tightened. I wanted to say no. I knew it wasn't right. I knew they didn't deserve it. But all I did was nod a shy yes. Her smile widened. Without saying a word, she turned around, opened the door, walked calmly back into the classroom, and shut the door again. I heard a lock. I stayed in the hall. Seconds later, I heard the gasps. Then screams. Desk scraping. Chaos. A splash of red, painted the tiny window in the door. The crying was so loud I can still hear it now. Almost as loud as Terry's laugh. And I didn't move an inch. I just stood there numb. https://www.reddit.com/user/accomplished_low7889. Story 6. There are some things from childhood that stick with you, not because they were particularly traumatic in the grand scheme of things, but because they were just odd, unsettling in a way you couldn't quite articulate back then. For me, it was the tapping. I grew up in a fairly ordinary two-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. My room was on the second floor, right at the end of the hallway. It was my sanctuary, filled with posters of bands and shelves overflowing with books. But starting when I was around 10, maybe 11, I'd occasionally hear it, a faint, rhythmic tapping. It wasn't the house settling or pipes groaning. This was distinct. Tap, 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 pause, tap. It always seemed to come from the same spot, the far corner of my room, near the window, right where the wall met the floor. The weirdest part? It often sounded like it was coming from inside the wall, or maybe just beneath the floorboards. I'd tell my parents, of course. My dad, ever the pragmatist, would check for loose siding outside, inspect the baseboards, even tap on the walls himself, trying to replicate it. He never could. Probably just the wind, kiddo, he'd say, or maybe a squirrel in the attic. But it didn't sound like a squirrel. It was too methodical. After a while, I learned to ignore it, or at least push it to the back of my mind. It wasn't constant, maybe happening once or twice a month, always late at night when the house was still and silent. It never felt overtly threatening back then, just there. An unexplained footnote to my childhood. Years passed. I went off to college, moved into my own apartments, and the memory of the tapping faded into the background noise of life. I barely even thought about it. Then, about 2 years ago, my father passed away. My mom, finding the old house too large and too full of memories, decided to sell it. I was tasked with clearing out my old room, packing away years of accumulated belongings. It was a strange, nostalgic experience, unearthing old toys, forgotten notes, and dusty yearbooks. I spent a few nights there, sleeping in my childhood bed for the first time in over a decade. The first night was uneventful, aside from the bittersweet ache of nostalgia. The second night, however, was different. I woke up suddenly around 3 a.m. The room was pitch black, the kind of oppressive darkness you only get in a house far from city lights. For a moment, I just lay there, disoriented, trying to figure out what had woken me. Then I heard it. Tap, 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 pause, tap. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, washed over me. It was exactly as I remembered, but somehow more present, louder. It was still coming from that same corner. My heart began to pound against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the otherwise silent room. I strained my ears, every nerve ending a light. This time, it didn't stop after a few repetitions. It continued, a soft, persistent rhythm that seemed to drill directly into my sanity. Tap, 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 pause, tap. I couldn't move. It was like my limbs were filled with concrete. I told myself it was just the old house, stress, grief playing tricks on my mind. But the sound was too real, too distinct. It was the sound from my childhood, a ghost I thought I'd left behind. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, my hand shaking so badly, I almost dropped it. The sudden glare of the screen made me wince, but I quickly turned on the flashlight, aiming its beam towards the corner. Nothing. Just the bare wall, the old wooden floorboards, a dusty skirting board. The tapping stopped the instant the light hit the area. My breath hitched. I scanned the entire room with the light, my heart still racing. The closet door was closed. The window was locked. There was no rational explanation. I barely slept for the rest of that night, leaving the flashlight on my phone aimed at the corner until the battery died. The silence that followed was almost worse than the tapping, heavy and expectant. The next day, I told myself I'd imagined it, or that it was some animal. I even went outside and checked the exterior wall, looking for any holes or loose panels. Nothing. I checked the attic. Just dust and old insulation. That night, I resolved to be ready. I left a glass of water on my nightstand and my phone fully charged. I tried to stay awake, reading, but exhaustion eventually claimed me. It was the sound that woke me again, but this time it was different. Closer. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't coming from the corner anymore. It was coming from the foot of my bed. I froze, my eyes snapping open in the darkness. My blood ran cold. I could feel the vibrations, ever so slightly, through the mattress. It was soft, delicate, like someone lightly drumming their fingernails on the wooden footboard. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap. I didn't dare breathe. The darkness in the room felt absolute, pressing in on me. Who was doing this? Or what? The sheer proximity of it, the deliberate, patient rhythm, was utterly terrifying. It felt like whatever was making the sound knew I was awake. It knew I was listening. I couldn't bring myself to reach for my phone. The thought of shedding light on whatever was at the foot of my bed, of seeing it, was more than I could bear. I lay there, rigid with terror, for what felt like hours. The tapping was intermittent now. A few taps, then silence, then a few more. It was as if it was playing with me, testing my resolve. At some point, just as the first hint of gray dawn began to seep through the curtains, the tapping stopped. It didn't fade away, it just ceased abruptly. I didn't move until the sun was fully up, painting stripes of light across the room. When I finally found the courage to sit up and look, there was nothing there. Just the old wooden footboard, the worn carpet. No sign of anything. I didn't spend another night in that house. I packed up the rest of my things in a blur of adrenaline and fear, my ears constantly straining for that sound. I practically threw the boxes into my car. As I locked the front door for the last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from one of the upstairs windows. The house sold a few months later. I never told my mom about what I'd heard. What was the point? She had enough to deal with, and she'd probably just say it was my imagination, grief making me see and hear things. But I know what I heard. It's been 2 years since that last night in my childhood home. I live in a new apartment now, a modern building in a busy part of the city. Most nights are fine, but sometimes when the apartment is quiet, when I'm on the edge of sleep, I hear it. Tap, tap, tap. It's fainter now, almost imperceptible. Sometimes I wonder if it's just the memory of the sound, burned into my subconscious. But other times it feels real, like something followed me. Or perhaps like the sound itself isn't tied to a place, but to me. I don't know what made that tapping sound, and I don't think I ever want to. All I know is that a part of me is always listening, waiting for it. And the silence, these days, is the most terrifying sound of all, because you never know when it's going to be broken. That's it for today's creepy Reddit tales. Before we go, I just want to say a quick thanks to all of you for watching, liking, and sticking around. You guys keep this channel going, and I'll be back soon with more stories that'll make your skin crawl. Drop a comment if you've got your own spooky tale to share, and I'll see you in the next one.